What if I told you medieval peasants, those folks who probably thought Wi-Fi was witchcraft, had heating methods so ridiculously effective they'd make your fancy smart thermostat blush with inadequacy? Forget your central heating woes and exorbitant electricity bills. From blazing living room bonfires to walking on toasted floors, these forgotten techniques kept entire families toasty during winters that would make a polar bear reconsider its life choices. But how did they pull it off without the internet or, actual insulation? In this highly educational and slightly mocking video, we'll yank back the curtain on 10 ingenious medieval heating methods that not only worked, but also inadvertently forced communities into some serious bonding. Get ready for a time travel adventure where our ancestors turned merely surviving into an art form, mostly because the alternative was becoming a human icicle. Central hearths, the original fireplace channel. Right smack dab in the middle of every medieval abode was the hearth, a simple yet utterly brilliant answer to, "Holy moly, it's freezing!" Unlike our modern wall-hugging fireplaces, medieval hearths were basically giant open fire pits positioned in the dead center of the main room. This allowed heat to swan dive in all directions, warming every nook, cranny, and possibly stray chicken. These hearths were crafted from stones that acted like natural heat sponges, soaking up heat from the flames and then graciously radiating it for hours, even after the fire had, retired for the night. It was essentially having a permanent, albeit slightly smoky, radiator in your living room. Speaking of smoke, there was one tiny hiccup. Since medieval homes considered efficient chimneys a futuristic pipe dream, smoke would leisurely waft upwards and then eventually find a strategically placed hole in the roof to escape. This meant interiors were perpetually sporting a charming soot decor and a robust burnt toast aroma. But did the peasants mind? Nah. For them, the sheer luxurious warmth of the hearth was all that mattered. It was where families huddled to cook, eat, and probably tell tales about the time someone almost froze their toes off. The hearth wasn't just a heat source. It was the vibrant, slightly smoky heart of domestic life, a symbol of comfort and security during those brutal winters. And while the hearth kept things cozy inside, the peasants also had neat tricks to snag some external warmth. But that, my dear friends, is a story for our next mind-blowing revelation. Solar heating, when the sun was their subscription service. While the trusty central hearth was busy roasting the insides of homes, medieval peasants also had a knack for leveraging external heat, specifically the gigantic fireball in the sky, the sun. Medieval architecture, though looking suspiciously like glorified mud huts, was actually astonishingly good at capturing and storing solar energy. Homes were meticulously designed to maximize sun exposure during winter when our celestial heater was playing peekaboo lower on the horizon. Large south-facing windows, which were often just openings, let's be real, allowed glorious sunlight to stream in and gently warm the interior. Thick stone or clay walls then did their heavy lifting, absorbing heat all day like a grumpy teenager absorbing Wi-Fi, and slowly releasing it at night, maintaining a surprisingly stable temperature. It was a primitive but surprisingly effective form of passive solar heating, a technique we still brag about today in our sustainable buildings. Plus, peasants used natural insulators like wood and straw, which were basically nature's bubble wrap, preventing precious heat from staging a grand escape. In particularly chilly locales, homes even got a partial subterranean makeover, buried in the ground for that extra thermal hug. But solar heating wasn't just about feeling snug, it was a matter of not turning into a human icicle. On sun-drenched days, peasants threw open doors and windows to let the warmth flood in. On cloudy days, it was back to the good old hearth and other heat sources. This mix-and-match approach proved medieval folks were masters of adaptation. They didn't have fancy tech, but they wielded what they had with the cunning of a fox in a chicken coop. And while the sun warmed their homes, something else contributed to the heat. Something a little woolier. Thatch roofs, nature's bad hair day. If you've ever gazed at a medieval house in a movie or a particularly dusty illustration, you've probably noticed those charming, shaggy thatch roofs. These weren't just for picturesque effect. They were a brilliantly practical and slightly fire-prone solution for keeping heat trapped indoors during winter. Crafted from densely packed straw, they functioned as nature's own super-insulating blanket, stopping heat from fleeing like a rogue knight and cold from barging in like an uninvited dragon. Straw was abundant, cheap, and basically the IKEA furniture of medieval building materials. Besides being a stellar thermal insulator, it was also somewhat water-resistant, protecting the house from rain and snow, mostly. However, thatch roofs had their quirks. They needed regular rethatching. Think of it like a house needing a haircut and a perm, because, well, straw tends to rot. Plus, they were irresistible apartment complexes for insects and rodents, offering a cozy and likely noisy home for critters. But for the peasants, the benefits clearly outweighed the delightful inconveniences. During winter, that thick straw blanket lovingly cradled the heat generated by the central hearth in the sun, keeping it snuggled inside. Bonus, straw was super lightweight, making roof construction and maintenance surprisingly manageable. Fun fact, thatch roofs also had a social role. Building and maintaining them were community endeavors, forcing neighbors and families to bond over a shared task. It was like a medieval barn raising but for your roof, ensuring everyone was prepared for winter and probably gossiping the whole time. And while the thatch roofs kept the heat contained, the neighbors next door also pitched in, the four-legged, bowing, and oinking kind.
Livestock heating, your furry, feathery, and sometimes smelly radiators. In a medieval home, animals weren't just for dinner or plowing fields. They were vital allies in the epic saga against the cold. Many peasant homes came with attached stables, creating a delightful co-living arrangement where cows, sheep, chickens, and even pigs snored or clucked or oinked mere feet from their human landlords. This wasn't just about convenience, it was a genius heating hack. The animal's collective body heat acted like a furry biological furnace, keeping the room temperature surprisingly bearable, especially on those bone-chilling nights. The walls separating the stables from the main living area were thin. Think privacy is overrated, allowing the animal's warmth to gently seep into the human quarters. In some particularly cozy arrangements, animals took up to 30% of the house, essentially becoming living, breathing, and occasionally pooping heat sources. Plus, animals were multitaskers, offering other valuable winter resources. Manure, for instance, wasn't just a delightful garden additive. It was collected and ingeniously repurposed as fuel for the hearth, when firewood became scarcer than a clean shirt. And naturally, these animal companions continued their essential work, churning out milk, eggs, and wool, absolute necessities for peasant survival. Of course, this intimate cohabitation had its unique challenges. The robust aroma of animals and stables could be quite pungent, turning every day into an olfactory adventure. And the insects they attracted were a constant buzzing nuisance. But for the peasants, these minor annoyances were a small price to pay. After all, in a harsh winter, every degree of heat was literally life-saving. And while animals provided a living warmth, peasants also had ways to heat the very ground beneath their feet. Heated floors, because nobody likes frosty toes. Imagine waking up on a freezing winter morning and stepping on a warm floor. For medieval peasants, this wasn't some fantasy from a home decor magazine. It was a practical necessity. They concocted an ingenious method for floor heating, heated stones. This involved lugging large stones, roasting them to perfection in the central hearth, and then carefully tucking them under the wooden or dirt floor. These stones, being excellent heat hoarders, would then radiate warmth into the room for hours, keeping everyone's feet wonderfully toasty. It was a primitive form of radiant heating, remarkably similar to the fancy underfloor systems we flaunt today, minus the digital controls and the absence of actual fire hazards.
Besides stones, some peasants also used bricks or clay for their floors, materials that excelled at absorbing and retaining heat. These were especially effective in partially buried homes, where the surrounding earth provided an extra blanket of insulation. But heated floors weren't just about comfort, they had a practical side too. In homes where floors were prone to dampness and cold, the radiating heat helped dry things out, potentially warding off illnesses, because who needs a medieval cold? And plus, the gentle warmth from the floor perfectly complemented the central hearth, creating an overall more pleasant, by medieval standards, environment for the entire family. Naturally, this technique demanded effort. The stones needed regular reheating, and the floor had to be meticulously constructed to avoid turning your home into a bonfire. But for the peasants, that sweat equity was totally worth it. After all, in a grim winter, every bit of heat was literally life-saving. And while their floors kept feet warm, peasants also had portable solutions to battle the chill throughout the day. Portable warmers, medieval hot pockets, and designer fire buckets. While the roaring hearth and cozy heated floors kept medieval homes snug, peasants still needed mobile solutions to stay warm when venturing outside. After all, work in the fields or dashing around the village didn't magically cease just because winter decided to go full-on Elsa. That's where portable warmers entered the scene, in the form of heated stones and the rather grandly named chaussets. Heated stones were brilliantly simple. Plop them into the fire until they were scorching, then swaddle them in thick cloths or animal skins. Peasants would then tuck these personal heat rocks into their hands, pockets, or even bravely inside their clothes, luxuriating in the radiating warmth for hours. It was the ultimate hands-free, on-the-go heating experience. The chaussets, on the other hand, were small metal containers. Picture a medieval can or pot filled with glowing embers or burning charcoal. These devices were particularly popular among the ladies, who used them to warm their hands or legs while tackling household chores or navigating the village's muddy thoroughfares. Some chaussets even came with decorative handles, proving that even amidst the daily grind of not freezing to death, medieval folks still had an eye for flair. However, these portable furnaces weren't without their risks. Overheated stones could inflict nasty burns, and chaussets required the caution of a seasoned pyromaniac to avoid accidental house fires. Still, they were indispensable for peasants who needed to defy the cold in all situations, even if it meant a slight risk of spontaneous combustion. And when night fell, it was time to contemplate another form of heating, the bed. But how did medieval people ensure their beds were warm and inviting? The answer involved a blend of practicality and, let's say, some unwanted bedfellows.
Bed warmers, toasting your sheets. After a grueling day battling the cold, nothing quite hits the spot like a warm bed, right? Medieval peasants were absolutely on board with this concept, but lacking electric blankets or fluffy duvets, they had to get creative. The solution? Warming pans and canopy beds. Warming pans were metal contraptions, usually crafted from copper or brass, filled with burning charcoal. Before bedtime, peasants would expertly slide these fiery pans between the layers of bedding, warming the sheets and banishing the chill. It was a simple yet astonishingly effective technique that guaranteed a few precious hours of thermal bliss. However, extreme care was crucial. A poorly placed pan could easily lead to an impromptu bed fire, or worse, a third-degree burn. Canopy beds were another clever strategy. These beds featured hefty curtains made of thick fabric that could be drawn completely around the mattress. Beyond offering a much-needed sense of privacy, because medieval homes were often open-plan to say the least, these curtains acted as ingenious heat traps, transforming the bed into a cozy personal cabin. To amp up the effect, some peasants piled on wool blankets or animal skins, providing an extra layer of insulation against the cold. But alas, not everything was rosy in the medieval bedroom. Hay beds, a common fixture of the era, were undeniably warm, but they were also a five-star resort for rats and insects.
Imagine trying to drift off to sleep while an entire rodent family hosts a rave under your mattress. Still, for the peasants, warmth trumped absolute comfort, even if it meant sharing their sleeping quarters with a mini zoo. And while warm beds promised more peaceful nights, medieval people also had techniques to crank up the heat during the day, involving a dash of engineering and a whole lot of ingenuity. Heat reflectors, when medieval folk figured out aiming heat. Imagine being able to boost a fire's heat output without having to chop down another tree. Medieval peasants, ever the resourceful bunch, did exactly that using heat reflectors, a brilliant technique that transformed a regular fire into an even more efficient warmth delivery system. These reflectors were fashioned from materials like polished metal or smooth stone, strategically positioned behind or around the hearth. The reflective surface acted like a primitive laser beam, bouncing the heat from the flames directly into the room rather than letting it sneak off through the chimney or walls. It was a primitive but undeniably brilliant way to squeeze every last degree of warmth out of their fires, especially crucial in homes where firewood was scarcer than a reliable barber. Furthermore, reflectors played a practical role beyond just warmth. They helped shield wooden or straw walls from the direct, scorching heat of the flames, significantly reducing the risk of accidental infernos. In more spacious homes, movable reflectors were used, allowing them to direct warmth to specific zones, like a sleepy bed or a busy workbench. But reflectors weren't purely functional. Some even boasted decorative engravings or patterns, proving that even the most utilitarian medieval objects could be a canvas for artistic expression. Of course, this technique wasn't entirely foolproof. Reflectors needed to be positioned with precision to avoid concentrating heat in a single spot, which could lead to discomfort or, you guessed it, property damage. Still, in a harsh winter, every extra degree of heat was a game changer, literally. And while reflectors amplified heat indoors, medieval folks also knew how to turn heating into a truly shared communal experience. Communal bonfires, warming bodies, souls, and maybe a little bit of ale. In a medieval village, winter wasn't a solitary struggle. It was a full-blown collective battle, and nothing embodied this unity more powerfully than the communal bonfires. These massive fires, roaring away in village squares or common areas, were gathering points where everyone could huddle, thaw out, and swap stories. These bonfires were more than just giant outdoor heaters. They were the pulsating heart of social life during the frigid months. As the flames crackled and danced, villagers would gather round to chat, sing, and even bust out some rudimentary dance moves. It was a glorious moment to forget the biting cold and reinforce those vital community bonds, absolutely essential for surviving tough times. Additionally, communal bonfires served a practical purpose. They were designated warm-up stations for anyone brave or foolish enough to leave their homes, whether for work or to visit a neighbor. In smaller villages, where homes were often simpler and less insulated, these bonfires were nothing short of a lifesaver. But the warmth from these bonfires wasn't just physical, it was also deeply emotional too. On extra bitter nights, villagers would organize festivals and rituals around the roaring flames. Yule, for instance, a pagan celebration marking the winter solstice, featured massive bonfires, feasts, and gift exchanges. These moments of shared joy helped keep spirits soaring even on the darkest, most desolate winter days. And while communal bonfires brought people physically together, they also served as a powerful reminder that united, medieval people could conquer any challenge. After all, winter was harsh, but their solidarity, that was even stronger. The resilience of medieval peasants, surviving winter one frosty, smoky day at a time. Winter was literally a trial by fire and ice for medieval peasants. With temperatures that would make a snowman shiver, resources as scarce as a dragon's smile, and living conditions that would make a modern glamping enthusiast weep, every single day was a heroic battle for survival. Yet, through sheer grit, ingenuity, teamwork, and an almost superhuman tolerance of soot and animal smells, they found ways to defy the cold and ensure their families emerged into spring mostly intact. From their indoor barbecue pits, aka central hearths, to their toasty underfoot stones, heated floors, to their shaggy, critter-friendly roofs, thatched roofs, to their living radiators, livestock heating, every detail of peasant life showcases an incredible connection to nature and a truly astonishing ability to adapt. They didn't have futuristic tech or an endless supply of Amazon deliveries, but they wielded what they had with the cunning of a seasoned survivalist. And while they were busy waging war against the cold, they still somehow managed to carve out time to celebrate life. Festivals like Yule and Christmas injected much-needed light and joy into the darkest months, reminding everyone that winter wasn't just about deprivation, but also about unity and hope. The story of medieval peasants, ladies and gentlemen, teaches us that human resilience can conquer even the toughest challenges. They didn't just survive winter, they turned survival into an epic masterclass in not freezing your bits off, all while smelling vaguely of wood smoke and sheep. Behold, an art form perfected with creativity, mostly out of desperation, solidarity, so you didn't freeze alone, and a deep understanding of the world, like knowing which puddle was less likely to contain plague. And you, Fancy Pants, how honestly do you think you'd fare in a medieval winter? Could you brave the cold with the same simple yet ingenious strategies, which mostly involve layering more wool and hoping for the best? Let us know in the comments what truly shocked you most on this delightful journey through time. Was it the lack of central heating, the questionable dentistry, and don't forget to subscribe for more fascinating stories about life in the past, or as we like to call it, stuff that makes you appreciate your thermostat.